Okay. It's
spiritual Israel, yeah? The Seventh-day Adventist Church is spiritual Israel.
okay.
Spiritual Israel. Alright? So, why is it that the glorious land, yeah, the glorious holy mountain, why is that not like looked at from a spiritual connotation as opposed to literal? Because we have the physical and we have the attitude. So I'm just trying to find the two because you've got the application typically and then you have the application anticipally. We are in the dispensation where it's anticipally applied. Is that correct?
I understand the question. Let me address it this way in a simple, quick fashion. Ellen White uses three terms for God's church. The SDA church. She says, we are true Israel. We are modern Israel. And we are spiritual Israel. The Seventh-day Adventist Church is a physical organisation, is it not? I mean, it's literal. Within this church there are wheat and tares. Okay? So we've got wheat and tares in the church. When Paul develops this idea of spiritual Israel, when he develops this idea, he says not all Israel are Israel. And he develops this thought, which we spoke about earlier, about those who are not circumcised in the heart. So if you're of the bloodline of a Jew and you're not circumcised in heart, are you spiritual Israel? He says you're not spiritual Israel, but yet you're part of that organisation. So although we're going to say that the SDA Church is spiritual Israel, yet it's a physical organisation which is the church militant, which has two components in it, the wheat and the tares. So although we want to spiritualize everything, we still live in a literal world. So as ancient Israel, even though we're going to say they were literal and we're spiritual, even within ancient Israel, there was an element of spiritual Israel there, and those who were false. Okay? So this idea about purely literal and purely spiritual is a bit more complex than we might at first think that it is. The other question is Babylon spiritual or literal at the end of the world? It's literal and spiritual. Of course it's literal and spiritual, and it's got God's people within it. Has it literally got them or spiritually got them? Both. So this crossover between literal and spiritual it appears like a good argument, but it's not. Perhaps it's not a good robust defence against this issue, because people will say at the end of the world we have spiritual Israel, which is the SDA Church, and we can't have a physical land. But ask yourself the obvious question, where are the headquarters of this church? In America. Why is it in America? Look at the heritage of Seventh-day Adventists. See where we came from. Seventh-day Baptists. How did the Seventh-day Baptists get there? You can't separate this issue of physicalness and spiritualness. After the Sunday law, we're the church militant now. We're going to become the church triumphant, the glorious holy mountain. Yes, we agree with that. Is that a spiritual church or a literal church? Both. Is the 144,000 a spiritual number or a literal number? Sorry? Both. It has to be both, because no one here is of the tribe of Judah or any of the other tribes. So we know it's spiritual. It's a spiritual number, it's a literal number. The 144,000 is the glorious holy mountain, literal and spiritual. They combine together. We're running out of time now, so what I want to do is, does anybody have any questions from verses 42 to 45? And let me just address questions that people might have on any term that, or any, I'll try and fill the questions, on those verses. So I'm not going to be able to cover all the material in those verses. as you're thinking, what I will say is this: once verse 42 occurs, verse 42, Egypt in verse 42 does not represent France anymore, it represents the world. Remember where I said that one power can be given two symbols. So America can be given the symbol of chariots, horsemen and ships, and also the glorious land. Also, a symbol can represent two different entities. So Egypt can represent France, but Egypt can also represent the world. And Ellen White talks about that quite frequently in her writings. So after verse 42, when the papacy has got the world, when he's got hold of the world, he's got hold of the treasures of the world. That's in verse 43. Verse 43 is talking about all the economic strength of the world. So it's always talking about the economics and the military. Okay? The economics of the treasure. The military strength of the papacy after the worldwide Sunday law is represented by the Libyans and the Ethiopians. The Libyans and the Ethiopians. People often use the Libyans and the Ethiopians as the rich and the poor of the world, and I'm not arguing against that, but there are many passages that talk about them as being men of war. They're men of war. So what it's trying to show is that you're going to have all the treasures, and then the Libyans and the Ethiopians represent all of the world, both rich and poor, and they're representing the army or the military strength that the world is going to offer the papacy. So the papacy has military strength and economic strength to do its work. We've dealt quite extensively with the glorious holy mountain. Let me just address one point on the glorious holy mountain if I can find it. There's some contention, and this is not going to bottom it out. In verse 45 it says, in the glorious holy mountain, and the glorious holy mountain. Verse 45, and he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas in the glorious holy mountain, or is it and the glorious mountain? So let's go to Joel chapter 2 verse 20. 11, 12. Joel chapter 2 verse 20. Joel chapter 2 verse 20 is dealing with this history, and it says, but I will remove far off from you the northern army. He's talking to Israel. He's talking to Israel in Joel chapter 2 verse 20, and he's saying to Israel, I'm going to remove from you the northern army. Who's the northern army? Babylon. So he's going to deal with Babylon now. And he says, I will drive him into a land barren and desolate. And then it says this, with his face toward the east sea, and his hinder part toward the utmost sea. And his stink shall come up, and his ill savour shall come up, because he had done great things. So you can see the imagery there of the papacy, Babylon, being destroyed. But let's see where that imagery is taken from. Okay? He's in the land of Israel, and he says he's going to be standing here, and he's looking in which direction? He's looking east. And when he looks east, it says he's going to be between two seas. He's going to be between a one sea here, which, verse 20, it says, with his face toward the east sea. So this is the east sea. And then he says, and his hinder part or his back part toward the utmost sea. And the utmost sea is this one here. So that's what this passage is describing. I hope, is there agreement on that? So he's standing in between that, because he has to be standing in between the two seas for him to look in one direction and have a sea behind him. If you look at the geography of Israel, okay, there are two seas that are spoken about. This sea here, the utmost sea, is the Mediterranean. And this sea here is the Dead Sea. There are two seas, the Dead Sea and the Mediterranean. So if you place Babylon in Israel, in this spot here, and he's looking at the Dead Sea, and behind him is the Mediterranean, where would he be standing? At the end of the world. In your geography, what is between these two seas? Sorry? It's Jerusalem. It's Mount Moriah. If you look at just your straight geography, Mount Moriah is in between these two seas. And if he were looking this way, with his face toward the east, and that has significance, because why is he looking to the east? Because there's a message, tidings from the east and the north, come upon him. So he's looking at this message, and he wants to destroy this message, and that's where he's standing, on Mount Moriah, between the seas. And Mount Moriah is in between the seas. So there's a lot more to understand about the imagery here, about what's going on, because we also know from Revelation that there's the Battle of Armageddon. We all know about the Battle of Armageddon. And the Battle of Armageddon isn't dealt with in this geography, it's north up here, at Megiddo. And do we know who was killed at Megiddo? One of the most famous kings of Israel was killed at Megiddo, Josiah. Josiah was killed at Megiddo. And all those stories have significance. So there's not just one story about the end of the world. We have to get all these different stories and line them up, line upon line, and we develop a much fuller picture of what's going on. Just so people aren't too concerned, maybe you still are, that when he stands in the glorious holy mountain, he's not standing in the church, because Joel 2 says, I will drive him into a land desolate and barren. Okay, so there is more to the understanding, more to the picture about what's going on about the glorious land in verse 45, whether it's in the glorious land or whether it's and the glorious land. I think someone had a question on that. Oh, is it? Oh, it's not me. Okay. Has anybody got any questions on 40 to 45? I've covered most of the major points, and I've given you the structure of this verse, of these verses. What we didn't tie down in a systematic fashion was when we go back to verses 30 to 36, how that history repeats. And that's of vital importance, of how that history is repeating. I think is it when I move? Oh, it's this one. No. This one. None of the I don't have a roving mic. Oh. Good. There's much more to study, but I hope I've given you the inspiration to go back and re-study this information. For those who are familiar with the message, you know, you can go to Seven Thunders and watch presentations, download the documents that they have for those studies, and we should be doing that. But you'll find that there's a lot more information than can be given just at presentations. There's a lot of detail that's those presenters are just skimming the surface, really to whet our appetites and to inspire us to study more. For those who aren't familiar with the message, please get familiar with the message. Ellen White says we need to understand what those events are that come up to the close of probation, and if you don't know them, you will be left short in the time of trouble, which is fast approaching. We are already past 1989. And how many years ago was that? A long time ago. There are a number of other topics that we haven't discussed. We haven't discussed the role of Islam and those sequence of events and where Islam fits into Earth's history today. That's one thing we haven't discussed, which is vital for us to understand. Another topic, another issue that we haven't discussed, and let me just try and find the, let me find the Bible first for that.